Hey, it's Kaero. Welcome back. It's been a week since Dominaria United released for MTG Arena, and the four oldest sets rotated out of Standard. During that time, we've seen a few decks come to power, but one rises above all the rest. So much, in fact, that as of the time of this recording, it accounts for a whopping 31% of meta share. And this, my friends, is an indication of a best of one standard that needs to be discussed. So, today I'm going to cover how this happened. I'm going to break down why this deck is so good. And this analysis will hopefully allow us to predict future trends about which decks may rise up in power and popularity after a set release, and ultimately help us plan to remain competitive if a ban occurs of any one of these included cards, which is actually, I think, pretty likely to happen since Mono Black Control is the very definition of format warping right now. So first, allow me to prove my point. You'll see some images behind me, some charts with some stats. These are from untapped.gg. And if you look to the right, you'll see the meta share currently at 31%. And just for reference, at its very height in New Capenna Standard, Boros Burn, which was very popular, it seemed to be everywhere, was at about 21% of meta share. So that's 10% more for Mono Black today than Boros Burn was. And here's the image showing the win rates to the left for the matchups against every color deck we'll get into in just a minute. This deck literally has zero bad matchups. It is favored to win almost every game against any other deck, even if only slightly. This is powerful. Usually a deck has one weakness or one bad matchup, but right now it has none. So let's discuss why this deck rose to the top so quickly. So, before we get into that, here are the matchups, and the win rates are what they're favored to win Mono Black versus other colors. And as you can see, as we scroll down here, we have Mono Black Control up at the top at 50%. Obviously, in a mirror match, it's going to be 50%. But then we have it against Mono Red Aggro, 57% to win, Rakdos Midrange 53, Enchantments 54, Mono Black Aggro 55, all the way down. 57, 56, 56, 64 against Boros Aggro, 74 against Is It Spells, Mono Green, same all the way down. We don't see below 50% at all. No bad matchups for this deck in the current standard meta. So, how did this happen? Well, with rotation, aggro lost a ton of steam. With the rotation of Luminarch Aspirant in white, the red white dual lands, and most of the mono greens heavy hitters being gone, there isn't an efficient enough base for aggro to begin applying pressure from turn 1 and keep that pressure on to close out the games. There are a few outliers in Gruul that can maintain a positive win rate. Up until recently, Mono Black Aggro has had a very good run, but also that just kind of proves the point, right? That the only answer to these black based decks is just other black decks. Secondly, black having nearly the best in slot card for each mana cost makes it effortless to build and maintain a solid mana base, and this is huge. If we compare this to other three color strategies that have come to the surface, such as the Esper Zur enchantment control that I built on day one of release, or Jund, Mono Black just doesn't have to worry about the mana screw, as it's good enough to just run straight swamps for the most part, with an inclusion of maybe one or two Takenuma Abandoned Mires for utility in the mid to late game. While we're on the subject of lands, the absence of man lands like Den of the Bugbear, Cave of the Frost Dragon, particularly in white, and Hive of the Eye Tyrant, and all those different lands that we saw in Forgotten Realms, those can punish board wipes, namely Meathook Massacre, Doomscar, before it rotated. And if they swept the board, you were able, if you were playing an aggro deck, to get in for 3 to 7 damage after they swept the board, and they would have to kind of respect that because they sweep the board, they know that they're going to get hit next turn. And typically, I would say white would benefit most from the exclusion and the rotation of these lands, but the main sweeper in white, Doomscar, also rotated, leaving the best sweeper currently in standard in the form of Meathook Massacre firmly in Mono Black's domain. Now, when we talk about creatures for this deck, Mono Black has incredibly aggressively statted creatures that are on par or above power and toughness to aggro decks. So gone are the days of using Shambling Gas, the 1-1, or an Eye Twitch, also a 1-1, to hold off aggro until you can meat hook the board. The Dominaria United standard mono black decks are more than capable of beating the opponent down if they get off to a slow start with the likes of Tenacious Underdog and Graveyard Trespasser, especially if you can get that Graveyard Trespasser to transform into its 4/4 werewolf version. Now, if you're trying to be the beatdown against one of these decks, Trading with any of these creatures feels very bad and is ultimately a losing strategy. Trading with the Tenacious Underdog almost always nets you card disadvantage, since the opponent will be able to blitz it back later and generate card draw. And the last thing I'm going to say about Underdog is this: if you doubt the power of this card, so typically an aggressive card will not slot well into a control deck, and the opposite is true, because they're just different cards. Tenacious Underdog saw play in mono black aggro, continues to see play in aggro. It also sees play in mono black control, and that should be enough to show you how powerful this card is. Aggro and control both want this for a 2-drop. Now, we can't talk about mono black control without talking about Sheoldred, the new Phyrexian Praetor. It's a 4/5 death touch for 4 mana that, if left alone, its ability will slowly drain the opponent and win games all on its own. The 4 life point swing on each turn cycle is absolutely oppressive. If you don't deal with it, it can eat you up. And it's also a 4/5 body with death touch. That means that if you cast something bigger than it, you can't actually expect to swing in, because it will just block and kill whatever is bigger. So like a Titan of Industry, it'll get some trample damage in, sure, but it's going to die. It also shuts down any aggro decks with 3/3s, even 4/4s. Shuts it down. In the 5-drop slot, we have Invoke Despair. Invoke Despair is extremely powerful. It is usually prohibited from being played in multicolor decks because of the cost. It costs 4 black. But this card is nearly always a 3-for-1 unless the opponent has a creature token to sacrifice, meaning you're using 1 card to always get 3 cards worth of advantage. Whether it's simply drawing 3 cards on an empty board if the opponent doesn't have any permanents, or wiping out their enchantments, creatures, and opposing planeswalkers, it is always a great deal when you cast Invoke Despair. If your opponent has invested 4 to 5 mana into a planeswalker, say 3 mana into a Fable the Mirrorbreaker, and on turn 5 you cast Invoke Despair, their planeswalker's gone, their Fable's gone, and then whatever creature they had is gone, that is absolutely oppressive. Cut Down, the 1 mana removal spell that we see that's run in mono black control in the 1-drop slot, hits about every aggro target that's currently available. The only thing it won't hit is 3/3s and above, and there aren't many of those right now. Gone are the days of the Werewolf Pack Leader, the 3/3 for 2 mana, and the Old Growth Troll in mono green that was a 4/4 for 3 mana. Cut Down is great, it hits almost everything. Let's talk about another one. In the 3-drop slot, Liliana of the Veil, which has historically been very good. It's proven to be even better than most people had anticipated in Standard, including me. Thought it was going to be pretty powerful. I didn't know that it was going to be powerful to this extent. She can come down on turn 3. She removes an opposing creature. You tick her up twice, and then if you want to have her sacrifice herself, you can also -2 on turn 5. Be ready to remove another creature. Very, very good. Very efficient. Graveyard Trespasser ticks in a slow drain while exiling things from your opponent's graveyard. In Standard, where reanimation is becoming increasingly popular, especially with the new card Cruelty of Gix, fantastic card, and Titan of Industry in your graveyard, that is a great strategy, but you have to worry about a Graveyard Trespasser exiling things from your graveyard before you can reanimate it. And if that's the opponent's main strategy, something that they're depending on, it can absolutely wreck their entire game plan, exiling those things from their graveyard. Also great in the mirror. So you're playing a mono black control mirror. They have a Tenacious Underdog that you traded off with. Play a Graveyard Trespasser, exile that from their graveyard, and it can't come back. So, we know the deck's potent. Where do we go from here? What if a ban happens? I think if a ban in any one of these key cards happens, I'm fairly confident mono black is still going to be a tier 1 deck, because each individual card in this deck is independently good, and that's very important. There are a lot of decks out there that are good, but they depend on synergies. Like that Zur enchantment control I was kind of talking about. Zur doesn't do much on his own. He needs to have a lot of enchantments, but this mono black deck, dropping any of these is just solid. So I think it will still be a tier 1 deck, even if they ban MYTHIC, even if they ban Sheoldred. I could see Invoke Despair getting maybe a ban. But if it falls out of favor, I expect to see Esper Zur, Jund Reanimator as the top decks in the format. The only aggro deck that seems to be doing well right now is Selesnya Enchantments and mono red with win rates about like 54% or something like that. So, another thing that's important to me is I want to close this video by saying this is not me just bitching about the meta. Okay? It's not. After rotation, these things tend to happen. However, I know there are a lot of people out there who are frustrated right now with the meta and can't seem to get over the hurdle. And I'm here to tell you that you don't just suck all of a sudden, okay? This deck is very potent. It is very hard to beat for all the reasons that I outlined here. So don't beat yourself up about it. Let's keep an eye on the meta, see where it goes from here. But if you're losing to this deck a lot, people are playing the hell out of it. It's at 31% of the meta share. And it's incredibly good. Okay? So if you're going up with a different deck against this, you're not favored to win, as we saw. So keep brewing, keep your head up. If you like this video, you got something out of it, please consider hitting that thumbs up for me, subscribing for future videos, and consider sharing it with your friends that like Magic. The more shares a video can get, the more content that I can make. And I thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.